When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: quiet on set. User: Camera28. Posted May 3rd, 1994.
Making movies is a real pain in the ass. I'm not good at anything else, so I keep doing it, but damn, I wish I could golf or do math or anything else. If I was an accountant, say, I'd know when my next check was coming and how much it would be, and odds are good I'd never have to share a stinky, drafty trailer with a bunch of other grown men who were born too late to join the circus. I'd also never have seen that thing in the trailer park, and let me tell you, I'd sleep a lot better at night. Let me set the scene for you. It all happened in Niles, a little town in northeast Ohio. It's not much to look at, but they have an old country buffet, and when you're in Ohio, all you can eat is the most you can hope to look forward to. I was there with a small crew working on an indie horror flick that never got finished for reasons I'm about to describe. Because we had to bail out, the financiers sued the production company, and it's still working its way through the court, so I can't tell you the name of the film, but I can tell you it would have been terrible. So whatever it was that chased us away, it did the world a favor. The plan was to shoot for 3 weeks at the end of October in '94. The producers had found this abandoned trailer park outside of town that was going to be both our primary location and crew quarters. Working at that level, you don't expect the Taj Mahal, but when we rolled up on this place, I thought the producer, who I'll call Gary, was pulling my leg. There was something like 12 of these old metal trailers clustered around a central courtyard like busted-up transformers getting ready to have a campfire. I don't think there was another soul around for 10 miles, and even that might be optimistic. Gary told us that the place had been abandoned sometime in the 80s and that locals stayed away, so none of the trailers had been vandalized or looted, making it perfect for our purposes. Looking back on it now, I suppose I should have asked the big question. Why hadn't anyone done that? Hell, why had they left in the first place? But instead, I just did what I was told, which included beating the dust off of old mattresses so the crew had somewhere to sleep and helping set up circus. If we hadn't been so busy, I might have noticed that something didn't feel right, but there just wasn't time to think about it. Time is money, and we didn't have either. First night sleeping on location brought the first nightmare. In it, I was standing in the trailer's living room looking out the front windows. It was a clear summer evening instead of the rainy October we'd arrived in, but I couldn't enjoy the sunset because a man was standing outside staring up at me through the glass. Well, I say he was a man because at first that's what he looked like. Blue jeans, white t-shirt, brown leather jacket, but his face spoiled the effect. It looked like the cheap Halloween mask version of a 50s greaser with hair so shiny it looked plastic, and his features distorted as if the makers hadn't been quite sure how facial expressions worked. This man radiated fury, and I have never been more scared of anyone or anything in my life. I remember being able to hear everything: the hum of the trailer's air conditioner, the crunch of the man's boots on the gravel outside, the steady rasp of my own breath, the rise and fall of an Ohio wind. His face, which hadn't started out as particularly believable, looked more and more like a flimsy disguise, and behind it, I could see yellowed eyes boring into me. I was startled by a banging sound like the firing of a starter pistol, and the creature's eyes looked toward its source, but I already knew. A sudden gust of wind had blown open the trailer's unlatched screen door, bashing its steel frame into the wooden deck railing. The creature's eyes widened, and it broke into a run toward the open door toward me. I did the same, frantically trying to get there before it could get inside, but before I could get there, I woke up. Shooting started the next day, and I shrugged off the nightmare as exactly that, but the weirdness kept building. Cell service out there was garbage, so after a couple days of using them to communicate to different pockets of the production around the trailer park and failing miserably, Gary went into Youngstown to buy a bunch of those Radio Shack FM headsets. I've used headsets like that on other productions, and they work just fine unless you're behind a lot of metal. Well, what are trailers made of? You guessed it, metal. So these things worked more like pagers than direct communication. If you or the person you were trying to raise were in one of the trailers, the best you could hope for was a couple squawks to notify you someone wanted to talk and you should go outside. The only times they seemed to work properly was when they were picking up stray FM signals from other places. At least, that's what we told ourselves at first. 4 days into shooting, our AD Curtis went missing from set, and when we finally found him on the other side of the trailer park, near the entrance to the forest, he couldn't figure out why we were all so worked up. He said Gary had radioed him over, telling him to come immediately, and he'd been gone less than 5 minutes. Our director, Michael, had been ready to tear Curtis's head from his body, but after he heard that, all the fight went out of him. He looked sick as he quietly took Curtis aside to tell him that he'd been gone for 3 hours and that Gary had been in town all morning negotiating fire permits for the pyro we had planned the following week. Curtis quit that afternoon. Soon, others started picking up stray signals on their radios too. It was benign stuff mostly, garbled conversations when no one was using the radio, this sort of low, deep voice that sounded like a slowed-down cassette tape, a chittering kind of laughter. It wasn't always easy to explain, though, especially when 1 or 2 people would get contradictory instructions that delayed shooting, sometimes by hours, from department heads that didn't even have headsets with them. I kept having the same nightmare, too. Every single night, I'd seen the fake greaser in front of the trailer on the same summer evening, and every single night, I'd raced to close the door before he got inside, waking before we came face to face. The last night I had the dream was also the final night of production. It was the first time I remember staying asleep long enough to take in the rest of the trailer, and I'll never forget the fake wood grain pattern of the cheap wainscoting as I raced toward a front door that hung open like a broken jaw. The fake greaser and I arrived at the same time, except in the time I'd lost sight of him between the window and the door, had given up on the disguise, and the thing I saw standing in my doorway no longer looked like anything human. The surface of it, or what I guess you'd call skin, bubbled and swarmed over a gelatinous mass with bones or horns protruding from it at angles I can't even describe. It was like trying to understand a 3D project using only graph paper. All I can say for sure is that underneath it all, the thing was trying to smile. I screamed until I woke up and kept screaming until the other guys sharing my trailer came to check on me. The next day was Pyro Day and the final day of production. It wasn't planned that way. We were technically only halfway through our shooting schedule, but when your pyro goes off early and kills 2 members of your crew, that's the ball game. Again, this is all still going through the court, so I can't say too much, just in case this isn't as anonymous as I'm hoping and it ends up as evidence. The gist of it is that we were blowing up a couple trailers as part of the film's finale, and we'd moved it up to the middle of production because high winds were supposed to be moving in, and we didn't want to risk the rest of the sets, which we were going to need for interiors. We had all the permits, the fire department was on standby, and our pyro guy Marty was an old hand at this kind of gag. It should have been just another day at the office. Instead, the charges, which Marty said hadn't even been armed yet, went off while Gary and Michael were inside. And that was that. Some guys were burned, some had ruptured eardrums, and everyone was out of work. Local police closed the trailer park, and production had to put us up in a motel in Youngstown. Is it a coincidence that the last night I spent in the trailer park is the last night I had that dream, or that what happened next happened next? Most days I try not to think about it. Sometimes I even manage to pull it off.
Subject, clouds. User, RP88. Posted, August 3rd, 1997.
My kid is nuts for cars. My brother Andy, his son, has it bad for trucks. His daughter loves horses, but my boy Max, he loves the sound a street rod makes as it comes off the starting line. He'd have loved Ascot Park in Riverside, but he was born just a little too late. As it is, I have a feeling that the night before his 16th birthday, he's going to be camped outside the DMV so he can get his license the second they open. He's only 8 at the moment and has to settle for watching NASCAR on TV, but they're building a new speedway up in San Bernardino where the old Kaiser Mill used to be, so maybe I can bring him there when it opens. Anyways, this story isn't about cars, exactly. It's about something that happened to us on the way home from a car show. Last week, CHP, California Highway Patrol, if you're not familiar, held a big car show over at El Dorado Park in Long Beach, and I brought Max. He loved it so much I thought he was gonna explode, especially when he got to the Pac-Man hot rod, which is exactly what it sounds like. I was more into the dunk tank, where for a couple bucks you could drop some patrolmen into a pool of water, and someone said Cheryl Baldinger from the Gladiators was doing shifts in the tank too, but I missed it, which is just my luck. All in all, it was a successful father-son outing, capped off with In-N-Out Burger before we got on the road back to Gardena. It was a lot of excitement for my little dude, and I had to carry him back to the car after dinner. He's getting pretty big, and I won't be able to carry him much longer, but I figure I'll enjoy it while I can. sun was setting as I buckled him in, and the horizon exploded in delirious reds and oranges. Ancient people must have lost their minds on nights like that, thinking the sky was on fire. I don't know if sunset is connected to what I saw on the drive home, but I'm pretty sure I'll never see another one without thinking about it. The drive from Long Beach to Gardena takes about a half hour if the 405 is clear, which it almost never is. That's what makes the next part so strange. The in and out is on Carson, and you take the exit from there to the 605 and then jump to the 405 by the river. If you know Southern California traffic, you know that the roads are always busy, even in the middle of the night, and after a while, you stop noticing. Traffic becomes a dull roar in the back of your mind, like the ticking of a clock or the hum of a TV. That night, as I got onto the 405, Max dozing in the back seat, I felt like something wasn't right, but I couldn't nail it down. Then it hit me. The low roar I just mentioned was gone. Not only that, but the entire 405, both sides and every single lane, was empty. Years ago, before Max came along, Molly and I would go to see movies together all the time. I remember we saw this one at the Highland. It was from somewhere like Australia called The Quiet Earth. It's about a guy who wakes up in a completely empty world and tries to find other survivors. Well, that's what the highway reminded me of. Molly passed in a car accident when Max was 2, and for a split second, the memory of that movie and the way I lost her combined to give me some wicked anxiety. I thought maybe something had happened and we died too. It was that sudden and that silent. But I shook my head. My stomach was gurgling from the burgers, and I'm pretty sure there's no indigestion in heaven, wherever it might be. That meant something else was happening, and a moment later, I saw it. The sky, which before had been a completely clear canvas for Mama Sundown to do her thing, was now full of clouds. The clouds weren't normal, though. They were clumped up together, hundreds of them, weaving around one another. It wasn't like they were being driven by the wind. Instead, it was as if they were moving of their own accord. Our dentist's office has this massive aquarium full of exotic fish, and that's what these reminded me of. My palms were starting to sweat, but I had to hold it together for the kids, so I kept on, my foot inching down on the gas just a little bit more. We had gone maybe 3 miles when one of the clouds stopped swirling with the others and swooped down towards us. That's when I finally got a sense of their size, which had to be at least 10 feet across and maybe 20 feet wide, easily dwarfing the car. The cloud settled over us, seeming to absorb any sound the car made and easily keeping pace as the speedo needle crept higher and higher. What happened next is difficult to explain, but I'll try. Have you ever done shrooms? Once they start to kick in, you see these little squiggles and patterns, especially if you close your eyes, and that's what this was like, except my eyes never closed. As the empty freeway rolled past us under a bright red sky, the squiggles in my vision coalesced into what looked like hexagons, an uncountable number of them nested one inside the other, turning and turning. Inside my head, I heard a voice that wasn't my own say, "Home." I felt a change in air pressure as my ears popped, and then, out of nowhere, we were surrounded by traffic. Business as usual on a Saturday night in Southern California. Whether by luck or, God forbid, design, we were far enough back from the other cars in our lane that I didn't rear-end anyone out of shock, nor did anyone crash into us. Hell, no one around us so much as glanced at our car, which is the opposite of what you expect when you pop out of Narnia onto the 405. whatever we'd just been through, Max hadn't been affected in the slightest. We were 3 blocks from home before he woke up and asked how much longer it would be. That's where my story ends. I wish there was more to it, some kind of button that made it all make sense. More than anything, I was waiting for Max to tell me that he'd had some kind of wonderful dream about his mom, but he never did. The next morning, all he wanted to talk about was the Pac-Man car. It's been a week now, and every time the sun starts to dip below the horizon, I wonder if I'll see them again. The clouds, I mean. If anyone else out there has seen the clouds, please contact me.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.